Well, it's great to see you today on Read Through the Word. It is January the 27th, and I love being with you today. I was divided, actually, in our lesson content, our lesson topic. It all has to do with sin and confession, but I was interested in something that one of the commentaries threw out, and I put it in my something new because it was something that I had not thought of, is the idea that starting in verses 5, starting chapter 31, verse 5, you see this list of all the things that Job did or didn't do. Remember, this chapter really is his last-ditch effort to proclaim his innocence to his friends. I mean, this is his last little argument. We do have a little bit more to go in the whole book, because there's 42 chapters and we're only on 31. But he's trying to convince his friends of his innocence. And he goes through and he talks about all the different things. Have I done this? Have I done this? Have I lied? Have I strayed from his path? Have I been unfair? Have I refused to help the poor? Have I been stingy with my food? And one of the commentaries posed this question, or not posed a question, but pointed out that so often we start our conversation with the Lord about all the things that we haven't done that might take the sting off, with the idea that it might take the sting off of things that we have done. I thought, wow, that I never really thought about that. But going down a list of what we have done, and I'm not like that person, or I've done this and I've done this, forgive me for this, to try to take the sting off of some of the things that we've done. Maybe not as much with God, but in our own eyes, lessen the severity of our sin in our own eyes. Which I thought that was a really interesting thought, and makes me wonder, makes me think of and process how I speak to God about my sin. Do I own up to it? Do I even think about it? So just, I'm throwing that out there. All right, that's really not what our lesson's about, although it does have something to do with our lesson. Because we learned at the very beginning that Job was blameless. And we remember that blameless doesn't mean without sin. It just meant, it says he feared the Lord and he shunned evil. It didn't say he didn't sin. But he certainly is proclaiming his innocence here. And he even talked about, where I kind of want to land with our lesson today, is I have made a covenant with my eyes not to look with lust at a young woman. For what has God above chosen for us? What is our inheritance from the Almighty on high? And I wanted us to just enter that conversation with the idea of, I know what he's saying here about lust. I know what that means. Well, he's pretty clear. Lust with a young woman. So maybe that was a problem in that day, as it is in this day, but we won't go into that. That's a conversation for another day. But the idea of lust is to consider, to think about. This word actually is not even translated in the original Hebrew. In NLT uses lust. The other translations do not use that word. They use something along the line of think upon. And basically that's what it's suggesting, is that you are thinking upon something. And in this case, in this verse, it would be a woman. And so that word lust has been put in there to describe that particular sin. But I want us to say that we can think about and consider lots of things that are not good for us, that are sinful in our lives. And I heard recently this term that I've tried to live by in the last few months. A preacher challenged the audience who was listening. I happened to be listening on via video, like somebody sent it to me. I didn't watch it live. About guarding our gates. And a gate keeps something from coming in. It also keeps something from going out. But a gate primarily is put there to keep something from coming in. It's a form of protection. And he challenged us to guard our gates. And meaning, watch what you're watching. Be careful what you're consuming. And I'm looking at that. I'm listening to that back in my head because that's something that I'm trying to do. In fact, I very rarely even have the television on anymore. And I used to have the TV on all the time. I wasn't watching it all the time, but I grew up in a house where it was just on. It was just that negative noise. There was just always something in the background. I would go to sleep. I mean, most of my life, my adult life, I've gone to sleep with the television on. And in my married life, which is most of my adult life, Scott would turn it off when he came to bed if he wasn't already in bed with me. And then if I fell asleep and it was on, he turned it off. But I just had to have that noise. Since I started praying, help guard my gates, I can go to sleep without that noise. I can have my house without having that background noise on. So I love that God has challenged me to do that. And one of my words this year is instead. And I believe that kind of goes along with, instead of doing things this way, we're going to do things this way. And to be flexible in what the Lord wants to work out in my life. So I want us to just think about that and the idea of what are we considering and thinking about. And when I say lust, I'm not necessarily thinking of that in a sexual nature. Please hear me on that, because there's a lot of people that lust power, position, possessions. They concentrate and they think on and they become obsessed with the things of this world. And what Job says something in verse 2 that I never really thought about. He says, for what has God above chosen for us? What is our inheritance from the Almighty on high? And so as we think of the idea of guarding our gates, our eyes, our ears, our mouth, things that we consume, and maybe even the gates of things that go out of our mouth, our hands, our feet, our mind. When we think of guarding our gates, I posed a couple questions here to ask ourselves. Is what I'm about to do, watch, read, something in that nature, acceptable for God, for me, from God? From what has God above chosen for us? Has God chosen this for me? Has God chosen for me to read this material? Has God chosen for me to participate in this activity? Has God chosen this opportunity for me, this book for me, this show for me, these friends for me? Are these from above? Are these approved, God approved things for my life? And then I've said this before, don't sacrifice the future on the altar of the immediate. So whatever, if we want something and we're just got to have it, we've lusted after it, we've considered it, we've wanted it, we've longed for it, and we get it. Kind of like that soup that Esau sold his birthright to Jacob for. Just right there immediately. He wanted it, and he lusted for it. He had to have it. And then he sold his birthright for a cup of soup. The second question that I thought of was, is what looks good, smells good, tastes good, feels good, and sounds good, is it worth compromising the future God has for me and the inheritance that I'll receive? Because every choice that we make has a consequence, good or bad. And when we give in to the lust of our gates, the desire of our gates, we are often compromising God's best for our life. So let's be truly careful about what we're letting in. Also what we're letting out when it comes to our mouth. And it took me to Matthew, where Jesus says, basically, if your eye, even your good eye causes you to lust, gorge it out. And he's talking about adultery in this context. Okay, so I know what he's talking about. But the idea here is something's causing you to sin, get rid of it, chop it off, gorge it out. And he doesn't mean that literally. That is not, he's not telling a man or a woman to go cut your hand off, gouge your eye out. But what he's saying is, have the discipline to get rid of whatever it is that's causing you to sin. And this is in reference to adultery. And if you're in a situation where there's someone at your work that's tempting you, then quit your job or ask for to be moved out of that department. Do something radical. That's what Jesus is suggesting. If that computer is causing you to do something that is not within God approved for you, then tell somebody to block it out with a password, and you can only use it when you're supervised. Yes, even as an adult. Do something radical to guard your gates if it's not God approved. And how do we know whether it's God approved? Ask him. God, is this good for me? Is this something good for me? Is this going to derail your plan for me? He'll tell you. He'll let you know one way or the other. Let's guard our gates. See you next time on Read Through the Word.